Why don't we get started? So my name is Sarah, and just in case you didn't know, this is Dr. Bessent. So today we're going to be talking about the research from UC Davis, specifically on taurine and cardiomyopathy and the relationship to grain-free diets and peas. So to start, maybe you can tell me, how are taurine and cardiomyopathy related?
Okay, well, let's start with taurine. So taurine is a amino acid. So it's a sulfur-containing amino acid that's really important for cardiac care. So for heart muscle function, for the eyes, for the immune system, and for multiple systems throughout the body. And taurine is very concentrated in the heart muscle and is very important in the functioning of the heart muscle. So taurine can be, dogs can get taurine in a number of different ways. So they could get it by eating it directly, so from muscle meat or meat proteins, or they can get it by synthesizing it within their body from cysteine and methionine, other sulfur-containing amino acids that then are able to be used to develop taurine. So taurine can be gotten either from eating it or from developing it within the body. And this research has come around for quite some time now. So in the 80s, dilated cardiomyopathy was a big deal for cats. And research showed that cats, being true carnivores, really needed taurine, and they needed it from their food. So it became called an essential amino acid, which means now the AAFCO, the regulatory agency or the regulatory oversight for pet food, now has a requirement for the amount of taurine that goes into cat food. The really great part about that is it almost eradicated acquired cardiomyopathy in cats, which is really fabulous. So now what we've been seeing is kind of hints in that same direction for dogs. The difference between dogs and cats is it was presumed, and some dogs definitely do it, that taurine can be made within the body from cysteine and methionine. So AAFCO has requirements for the amount of cysteine and methionine that needs to be in a pet's food. But taurine was not considered an essential nutrient for dogs. So they did not require that, and there is no requirement for taurine in the dietary source for dogs at this point. Wow. But what the research is showing is that there's definitely a correlation between dogs that have low blood taurine and the development of dilated cardiomyopathy. So let's talk about what dilated cardiomyopathy is. The heart is a muscle, and that muscle is really strong and toned, and with every beat it contracts and pushes blood up into the body and has the circulation going. When a heart is deficient of taurine, the heart muscle is not as strong and toned as it should be, and so this pump, slowly but surely, the heart muscle starts to get weaker and weaker, and it starts to dilate. So now the chamber of the heart is bigger, has more blood in it, and the force of the muscle is not as strong as it should be, so it can't push the blood throughout the circulatory system the way that it should. So the signs that you see in pets that have this is they start to develop fatigue. They're not as energetic as they were in the past. They start breathing heavier with exercise. And it can progress all the way to the point of heart murmurs, arrhythmias, and backup of fluid into the lungs, where then the dog starts coughing. So cardiac problems are a big deal, and no question you need to go to your veterinarian. If your dog is showing any of these signs, you need to go to a veterinary cardiologist. Have a thorough workup, which includes an echocardiogram, which is an ultrasound of the heart, to see how dilated the heart is. And then certainly it's becoming the standard in veterinary practice to also do a taurine level. And if the taurine level is low, then you may want to increase the meat-based protein into their diet. So let's talk about where you would get taurine. not only can it be made and you can get a dietary source of it, but then it matters what food that your dog is eating. So meat is really high in taurine, especially healthy, fresh, good quality meat is really high in taurine, as well as organs, particularly heart muscle. Plants have minimal to no taurine. So any grains have minimal to no taurine. Any carbohydrate products like potatoes or peas or tapioca, any of those things have minimal amounts of taurine. So when you look at the research, kind of the thought process is they took these dogs, and in general, dogs that develop cardiomyopathy are kind of the middle to large breeds. Dobermans, Boxers, Golden Retrievers, Cocker Spaniels, Great Danes, all fairly big dogs. And what they found is those dogs need a higher amount, potentially need a higher amount of meat-based protein than plant-based protein. And I think that was the crux of the therapy from my interpretation as a holistic veterinarian, is that grain-free diets, kind of goes back to my thought process previously, that originally in the pet industry, we had really high grain diets. And the thought was that grains that are thoroughly cooked have been broken down enough that a scavenger carnivore like a dog could digest it. So then, of course, the trend went from grains to grain-free. But grain-free does not mean that it's high meat content. Grain-free means that there's probably some meat in it, but it's other sources of starches. So potatoes, peas, tapioca, other sources of starches. So a lot of the research was done on these dogs that had dilated cardiomyopathy. They were eating grain-free diets. And so then a lot of questions came up. Does peas have an effect? What is the legumes or the high carbohydrate? How does that affect taurine? The way that I would interpret it is, we know that meat has high taurine, and we know that plant-based proteins do not. So you can get protein from meats and you can get protein from plants. And so as a pet parent, when you look at the back of your bag and it says, say, 20% protein, that doesn't tell you, is that 20% 10% meat and 10% plant protein? And that has a direct correlation to the amount of taurine in the diet. So if you have a higher meat base, especially high quality meat base, versus plant based, you're going to have a higher dietary taurine level. The original research was really interesting. It started on lamb and rice meal, or excuse me, a lamb meal and rice formulas. And so we've already established that high quality meats have high taurine and plants have very little taurine. Well, meat meals, so anything that ends with an M-E-A-L, so meal, is actually a rendered product that is poor quality meats, and those poor quality meats are also heavily heated to sterilize them. And in doing that, it damages a lot of the taurine as well. So the original research with the lamb meal and rice was almost devoid of taurine because of the poor quality meats and then the grains. So ultimately, if you increase the meat to the diet, that's super important.
Is there a way to determine, so you said that you can't look back to the guaranteed analysis for the percentage of protein, but what ways can pet parents figure out how much plant-based protein versus how much meat-based protein is actually in their food?
That's a tough question. And the best answer to that is go next to the ingredient deck. So when you look at an ingredient deck, the one thing that is absolutely guaranteed is that the ingredient deck should be listed from the highest component to the lowest component. So the first 10 ingredients generally tend to be the highest amounts in those formulas. So let's say we look at a grain-free kibble that has salmon as its first ingredient, which is great. And then it has potato and pea and tapioca and pea starch and pea fiber and blah, blah, blah. So each of those 10 components, of those 10, 1 is meat-based. The other 9 is plant-based. So of that protein, you know that only 1/10 of it is actually from meat, and 90% of it is from plants. So that in itself would tell you that it's probably a low taurine formula. If that doesn't tell you, so again, anything that is a meat meal tends to be lower quality, lower taurine level. So you might have salmon and turkey meal. Well, that's still pretty low. So that's one way. The other way would be to call the manufacturer and just ask, what's the taurine level in your food? Or what percentage of meat protein is in this diet? And that can definitely help you.
What about in the situation of someone who may be on a budget and they are only able to afford a basic kibble that, and what would you suggest? Should they be adding to that? Should they be supplementing taurine? What would be your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that absolutely there's many reasons why kibble is the best choice for that particular pet, whether it's digestive upset or whether it's price. But what I would say is adding some meat to their diet, and particularly if you can add some organ meat like heart meat would be great. So I've had clients in my practice that they watch for sales, and when turkey is on sale, they stock up on it, and then they can just add some turkey to their kibble. So add some to their diet. Or you can buy freeze-dried beef heart or freeze-dried chicken heart or turkey hearts. Those are great sources of taurine as well. Part of the other really exciting part about this research is that when dogs got the amount of taurine that they needed, boom, they got better really quickly. And they were even able to get off of their heart meds, which is kind of unthought of in veterinary medicine. So it's really neat that you would see a difference fairly quickly.
Another question, are there certain species of organ meat that are better for your dog?
Not really. You know, chicken, duck, beef, turkey, they're all kind of the same. You know, they're all high levels of taurine. So it's not so much about the species, more about the freshness and the wholesomeness of the meat.
Is it possible to overdo the amount of taurine that you give your dog?
That's a wonderful part, is it isn't. Taurine is an amino acid. So if you give too much taurine, they just use it as energy.
So the real question, are peas bad for dogs?
No. Peas themselves are wonderful food. So a small amount of peas are excellent in a dog's diet. It's vitamins and minerals and plant protein that can be used. They have phytonutrients. Peas are great. It's when there's way too much pea that limits the amount of animal-based protein that's the problem. And it's kind of it's economics of some sort, meaning that meat is the most expensive ingredient, and then plant-based proteins are less expensive. So everybody wants to make their product as cost-effective as possible. So if I can put in 90% plant proteins and 10% meat, I can get a product out to the market that's a lot more inexpensive. So it's not about peas, it's about way too many peas that seem to be a problem. There are still a lot of questions to be answered. So this is the preliminary. There's still many more questions. Like, one question that I wasn't able to find the answer to is, do legumes or peas interfere with the development of taurine? Does it interfere with overexcretion of taurine? those questions are still to be answered. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's still a lot of questions to be answered. So I know that UC Davis is probably looking for subjects, so if this described your dog, you can certainly contact them and see, and they're basically saying don't change their diet, go and do a thorough cardiac workup, do taurine blood levels, and then contact them, and they might allow your dog to participate in the study, which would be really fabulous. But there's a lot of questions yet to be answered. But I think some common sense is telling us that if taurine is low, supplementing with it is a good idea. And that supplementation could be with a supplement. It could be a powdered taurine. It could also be freeze-dried organ meat. It could also be just adding really good quality meat to your dog's diet because, again, they're carnivores.
This is something to touch on. You were talking a little bit about organ meat being fresh. What is the perspective on organ meat that is freeze-dried versus dry roasted? Is there a specific form that is above all else?
Great question. Taurine has two weaknesses. One is it's very sensitive to heat, and the other is it's water soluble. So anytime you're going to be really heating their food, that makes a big difference. We hear about it all the time that heat treated is so much worse. Well, for taurine, it really is. So if the food is produced under high heat, you're going to be losing a lot of taurine. So freeze drying is great because it's subjected to a very small amount of heat. Air drying, very minimal heat. Lightly cooked without a lot of heat is a great way to do it. So yeah, minimizing the amount of heat in the processing of meat is absolutely perfect.
Perfect. That answers all of my questions. Did you want to add any other points that you wanted to touch on before we start answering everyone else's questions?
You know, again, peas shouldn't be villainized. They're fine. And everything is in moderation, so moderate amounts of it. There's still a lot of research to be done, so there's a lot of questions still to be answered. And, you know, we can look, I as a holistic veterinarian who practice all day, every day, kind of look at it and say, what are some common sense conclusions that you can take from the research that's already available? And some of the common sense conclusions is, as meat is good for dogs, and adding some, especially if they're showing any of the symptoms, seems to be a wise thing for me.
Perfect. So we have a few questions that we're going to go through. Thank you. So our first question is from Karen. Is there a difference between, oh, this kind of goes along with what we were saying. Is there a difference between fresh peas and cooked peas?
Yes. Not really. Sorry, Karen. Because peas have very little taurine. So it doesn't matter if you're cooking them or they're fresh. Then it would be a matter of lightly cooking them, lightly steaming them is appropriate for dogs because they're rip, tear, and gulp. So if they're steamed, they usually digest them better. But a young, vibrant dog who would digest really well should do fine with either. So you kind of weigh it off. One is when you lightly cook them, you could be changing some of the heat labile, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. If you're feeding it fresh and raw, some dogs that have less strong digestive systems could get gurgly guts from it.
Perfect. Our next question is from Jennifer. How long does it take to see a difference in my dog's heart after switching food or supplementing taurine?
It's incredible. I mean, that's such a great question. That was one of the things that really struck me about this research is it's in cardiac problems, in veterinary medicine, we think that it's just a downward slide and that we do a lot of things, we give a lot of medication, but ultimately you're going the wrong direction. And this was dramatic. So usually a taurine deficiency can take 2 to 3 years to start to accumulate enough that you see some symptoms. I don't know exactly how many weeks, but the literature says that it was a quick response. So I'm assuming that quick response would mean a month and you'd start to see a difference, and you might even see differences within a week.
Wow. Our next question is from Carol. Should we supplement even on a high-quality diet?
I don't think that you need to. If you're, and let me tell you what I think is a high-quality diet. If, in my opinion, a high-quality diet is a diet that has wholesome meat, good quality meats, preferably has some organ meat in it, and then some fruits, vegetables for the antioxidants and phytonutrients. So if you're on a raw diet where you're using a lot of meats, you're covered. If you're on freeze-dried diets, tend to be higher meat. So it's all about the meat content. So as long as good quality means that the actual food is good, not necessarily just the marketing is good, yes, then there's no need to supplement.
Just to clarify, when you say good meat, you just mean not a meal.
I mean not a meal. I mean it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be raw, and it doesn't have to be fresh, but it has to be non-decomposing.
That is, yes.
So a meat that you would eat, that a human would eat,
right,
is healthy and wholesome, and that means that the taurine is still there. Because as meat degenerates, so 4D meat, for example, bacteria start to eat all the taurine that's in that meat. So old, rotten, stale, decomposing meat, one, is gross. Two, it really has a limited taurine.
Right. Our next question is from Lindsay. Is dilated cardiomyopathy always fatal, or can it be cured?
That's a good question. It is a chronic disease, meaning that that flabby bag of muscle can no longer push fluid as well as it should. Could that be that dog's demise? Absolutely. It could be. That could be it. But they can also, with today's medications, which are wonderful, they can continue to live for years with dilated cardiomyopathy, because it's also not, it could be a small amount all the way to really severe. So it really depends. And sometimes all the good medication can keep them going for a long time, and then something else happens, a cancer or something like that. So it's not absolutely fatal, but it definitely can be, and it definitely affects the quality of life.
Our next question, does age matter? Is it more of a young dog or an old dog issue?
It's a great question too. It's oftentimes middle to older dogs, middle to older age, because it takes time for the deficiency to affect the organs. So usually you're starting to see that, as they age, so a golden retriever, they're 7, 8 years of age, and they're just aging faster. They're more lethargic. They're just not as energetic as they were. So it tends to be in larger breed dogs, and that makes sense, because if you are marginal in your nutrition, the bigger dogs are gonna have a bigger deficit. So, and then the older they are, the more kind of cumulative deficiency they have. So you don't often see it in little dogs, and you don't often see it in young dogs.
When you talk about bigger dogs, maybe defined by size, is that 50 pounds plus? Is that 60, 70, 80 pounds?
Yeah, it could be, in my opinion, it would be 40 to 50 and above.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question is from Alyssa. If I increase meat in their diet, this kind of goes along, how soon will I see that? Soon will they be energized? Okay. Next question is from Mariah. My dog has a heart murmur. Could this be connected?
It certainly can. The heart is, it beats all day, every day. And if it doesn't have the nutrients that the heart muscle needs to beat properly, can a murmur develop? Yeah, absolutely. Could an arrhythmia develop? Absolutely. So dilated cardiomyopathy is the research, but it'd be interesting to see, as we get more answers over the next year or so, can heart murmurs be affected as well? And I'm not saying that all dilated cardiomyopathy or all heart conditions are from taurine. Some.
that ends all of our questions. Do you have any other points you want to touch on?
No, I thank you guys all for coming and spending your Friday afternoon with me. And thank you, Sarah, for all the great questions, and hopefully we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.